This program is brought to you by the Center for a Sustainable Today. Our world is an amazing, complex living organism, and we coexist in a symbiotic relationship. With this great power comes a great responsibility, a responsibility to ensure the future by taking steps to be sustainable today. Here is the host of Sustainable Today, Jean Bauman.
Hello, and thanks for joining me on Sustainable Today, the show that helps you take action right now to be more sustainable both at work and at home. Today's program is on community development. That is, how to develop our cities, our neighborhoods, our communities to be more sustainable, more vital and vibrant. My guests are two proponents of one approach called Transition Towns, let me get that right, a movement that started in Totnes, England, if I remember. Now, it's made its way to Portland, and so who we have today is David Johnson.
Yes.
And Jim Newcomer. Welcome.
Thank you.
Well, before we find out what the two of you are up to, I'm actually going to do a little bit of what's in the news. As reported in Reuters this month, President Obama ordered the Energy Department to set even more stringent efficiency standards in the Energy Star program. Now, as new standards are met by manufacturers, new household appliances are expected to save over $500 billion in the next 30 years. And of course, those standards should also reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Now, you might remember that environmental groups in 14 states sued the Bush administrations a few years ago because the Energy Department regularly missed deadlines in setting energy efficiency standards for manufacturers to meet. So, Francis Beinecke, president of the Natural Resources Defense Council, said, with this announcement, the Obama administration has reaffirmed its commitment to repower America with clean energy that will jumpstart the economy, strengthen our energy security, and help solve the climate crisis. So I couldn't agree more with him. And of course, we'll do all of that and keep a little bit of green in everybody's pocketbook too. I bet you guys are all for that as well. Now, on the economy front, one of the unexpected fallouts from the downturn has been a dramatic slump in the market for recyclables. So if you saw our Junk to Funk show that featured some fabulous fashions made with recycled stuff, such like a Vogue dress that was made entirely of papers that have been clipped and curled from the old magazines, then you might think that there's always a market for recyclables like metals and paper. But unfortunately, that just isn't the case. So the market for trash crashed this winter. And according to the New York Times article that I read, recycled materials started refilling landfills or accumulating in warehouses across the nation and the world, as cities and recycling companies couldn't find buyers, or because they couldn't afford to sell that recycled material at such low prices. We were just talking about this earlier. So, for example, a bale of mixed paper that was selling for $20 a ton, well, it used to sell for over $100 a ton last fall. And metal recyclers, well, they were claiming that in the tin industry, there was this dramatic drop from over $327 a ton to only $5 in just a few months. So, this is really having an underlying problem with recycling programs across the nation. And for instance, right here, Metro's master recycler, Plastic Roundup, was suspended until further notice. Now, on the other hand, some cities are required to keep recycling, and so they're storing that recycled materials. They're required to do so by law. And others are just finding places to warehouse because it's more expensive to fill the landfills than to actually transport this material. So anyway, it's been a big issue and an unexpected fallout from the economic downturn. So, but let's go ahead and get going on this topic for our day today, which is transition towns. And so what is Transition Towns all about? What's the name from and how did it get started?
The transition initiative, as it's also sometimes termed, is it was started by a good friend of mine back in Britain about 3 or 4 years ago now, and he was Rob Hopkins was the person who started it all, and he had an interest in climate change, but wasn't so aware of the issue around peak oil, the idea that we will at some point, some say we've already reached it, some say in the coming years, reach that point when half the extractable oil has been taken out of the earth. From there on in, demand increases as supply lessens. And how do we cope with that? Rising prices brought about by supply and demand, and it's going to affect every aspect of our society. And so what Rob wanted to look at was how we transition, how we move from today, where we have relatively cheap oil, to a time in the future, possibly only 20 or 30 years hence, when oil is going to cost more, it's going to affect every aspect of our society. How do we make that transition? And his particular interest was the size of the problem is so big, it's taken us 150 years in the lifetime of oil on this planet to get here. We're probably going to have to make this transition very, very quickly, and it's going to be too big a problem for government and too big a problem as well for the general public. But if we all come together as a community and work together, then there's a possibility we might be able to make that transition from now to the future.
What made Totnes England so receptive to this idea?
Totnes, I sometimes think of it as like a small version of Portland. It's a very turned-on alternative community there. Rob moved there with the idea of wanting to explore this idea. He originally started it in Ireland, but he moved to Totnes because of the receptivity of the community, really. Spent a year networking, sharing his ideas, and then the project took off from there.
And what was your role in that project?
I've known Rob, as I say, for a number of years, and I helped in one of the initial think tanks around how transition might work, what the challenges might be, where it might go. And also, part of transition is not only looking at the outer aspect in terms of how we recreate our communities, but also the inner aspect. And I know some of the people he was liaising with that in terms of how we deal with, how we cope with this news that we are going through transition. So I helped a bit on that as well.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to come back to that in just a second, David. Jim, what's your role with Transition PDX?
I helped get it started, I guess. A friend of mine and I realized about a little over a year ago now that given peak oil, given climate change and what's likely, the changes that are likely to limit our future access to resources, that we would all narrow our horizons, and we began looking for ways to organize communities for resilience. And then we just happened on David already given one talk. He was asked to give a talk to the Portland Peak Oil Group, and we heard about that. And we'd attended that, and my friend and I both worked with the Peak Oil Task Force that the city organized a couple of years ago. And we just realized this is the thing that makes a lot of sense. And the more we studied it, the more really useful this framework seems to be.
Well, that leads me to a question. There are lots of different frameworks out there for how to transition communities and how to kind of shift our thinking given climate change and peak oil. So what's different about this particular framework?
I feel as though it's a loose set of tools that any community can take. It's not saying do it this way. It's a loose set of ideas which any community can take, use all the projects they already have going, and it can bring these projects together. You might have a lot of different projects going on in the city, but if they're not talking with each other, there can sometimes be maybe a bit of antagonism, or if that's not happening, at the very least, there isn't a sharing of ideas. You bring people together, you start sharing these ideas, and so much more comes out of the possibilities that arise, I think, are so much greater then. And so the transition model, I think, gives a framework on which you can bring together what you're already doing and help to move forward. It's certainly not another thing coming into town and saying, move out the way, we're here. It's a framework, I think, on which you can hang what you're doing. And that's certainly what I'm getting from people I've met over the last year or so here in Portland already engaged in projects.
Okay, great. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about what some of those tools are that you just mentioned. But I want to come back to something you said earlier, because I saw this on the website about the founder, and he talks about the head, the heart, and the hands of making a transition. And you started to talk about that a second ago. Could you say more about that?
Sure. Another thing I like about the transition movement, it's a very holistic way of looking at this process. It's very easy and very important to look at, you know, where our food's going to come from, where our energy is going to come from, and things like that. Finance, local finance. But this is also acknowledging the fact that we have to understand the problem, first of all. So we've got the head side of it, actually understanding really what it is we're up against, so that our response is proportional to the problem. It's not, it doesn't get too caught up. It doesn't end up being something too exaggerated or too small. Then you also have how we actually cope with this news. And we all cope with this in different ways. It's very challenging to the future that we are told that we might have in front of us. If you're based upon the idea that things will only get better or things will carry on as they are, then something like peak oil puts a big challenge to that. If your life is spent, the idea of flying around the world and travelling a lot, peak oil puts a big stop in that. And different people will cope with that news in different ways. And so you've got the heart side of it, looking at how we cope with it. It also helps you deal with other people as you work with people as they take this news on board. And then the hand side of it is just the practicalities of going out there and working out alternative energy, growing local food, and sourcing local clothes and things like that. So I like this holistic approach. It's not saying we only need to go out and grow local food and the problem's solved. It's recognising we're a holistic people. The world is holistic. We need to work on all aspects of the problem.
But I really like that, because as an organizational development coach and consultant, that's exactly what attracts me. So I can understand, Jim, why when you heard David speak, you went, this is a framework we want to use.
Right.
So could you just say a little bit about how did this really get started in Portland?
Well, we just started it.
Exactly.
We just got together, had a meeting, and said, let's go. And and we had no idea what we were doing. You know, we're making it up as we go along. And we still are. I have an idea that Rob did that in Totnes, although he's a smarter man than I, so he had a little more organization and purpose in it. But we just stumbled from one solution to the next. I mean, you know, if you're looking at the question of how do we build a society that in 50 years or 70 years will be more or less self-sufficient because we can't get food, which, you know, normally now we go to a grocery store, the food comes from 1,500 miles away on an average. Well, if it has to come from within a day's walk, or, you know, or and we can't bring it in on trucks anymore, then what do? How do we get clothing under those circumstances when it may come in from China or it may not? And, you know, that all those questions come up. So obviously we're making it up as we go along, and we just formed a core group and started studying it. And David gave us a lot of encouragement and a lot of information. And actually we've had people come in from England here in the last month to give us a 2-day training on their experience.
Well, what were the key, and maybe I should ask this of you, David, what were the key learnings that you had from the experience in England?
I would say the main things is that it almost might sound very obvious, but no community is the same. Rob developed these ideas over a course of a couple of years, let's say, of trying out transition within Portland. There are 12 ingredients that make up the transition movement, which is found to work. They're not prescriptive. You don't have to follow them all, and they don't necessarily fit in one order. But these were ideas. These were real life scenarios which he found helpful and had intended to work. But as they've moved around into different communities have used them within their own way. So I think that probably one of the main learning is this is not a mould that you just pick up and put there and say, right, you do it like this. You are given a set of, it's like teaching you how to use a skill like carpentry, for example. You then use that and take it out into your own world to use it in the way which is most beneficial. I would say that has been the biggest learning. And the other learning for me, which really inspires me about this movement, is how you can give people, you bring people together, give them these tools, and how they can use them all their myriad of different ways. And from that, so many wonderful experiences can come out of it. And I think that, to me, that's where the real inspiration for this comes. It's about inspiring ordinary people, ordinary communities. It's not about waiting for leaders. It's not denying that the role that leaders play, but it's saying, look, you can do something about your future. You don't have to wait for somebody else to do it.
Well, I like that it's kind of like a set of tools that the neighborhood itself or the community itself uses and adapts based on what they need. So that's exciting.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to pause this discussion about Transition Portland, or is it Transition PDX, to take a look at a neighborhood that was transformed a few years ago. Reporter Katie Wood takes us on a tour of New Columbia, a remarkable urban redevelopment in North Portland. The original housing, known as Columbia Villa, had been built in 1942 for the naval shipyard workers. After the war, the shipyard was decommissioned. Columbia Villa became subsidized housing and eventually went into disrepair. And sadly, it was the site of Portland's first drive-by shooting in the 1980s. Starting in about 2000, the neighborhood was redesigned, raised, and rebuilt with new thinking about community and design and livability. Completed in 2006, New Columbia is hailed worldwide as a model sustainable community.
Katie Wood, and I'm with Sustainable Today, and today we are at a housing development called New Columbia, and today we're talking with Marcy McAnally from Herbsworks. How are you doing today, Marcy?
I'm doing great, thanks.
Great,
Kate.
and you guys had a huge hand in this urban development, correct?
Correct.
And what was your mission or goal when you took on this project?
It was to desegregate the affordable housing that was on the Columbia Villa site and reintegrate this neighborhood with the adjacent neighborhoods, the streets, the parks, the way housing faces the streets and the way alleys are designed, the way whole communities like this work and are integrated with their other neighborhoods that surround them is a really big part of our mission. Here, for instance, we've tried to do things like make the streets as focused on the houses and the porches and the fronts of the houses as possible, really tried to get the parking and the garages off of them and into the lanes behind or alleys behind the houses.
When it comes to housing developments, how do developers come up with how they're going to place their houses and roads? Is there a national standard?
I think that the national standard is kind of isolated pods of neighborhoods, that subdivisions that have an internal street system, maybe connected at an arterial in one place. So people have to go back out of this neighborhood and on the arterial to get to their jobs or schools. They're generally single use, residential only, and then on top of that, they're usually single income type of houses. I think people are beginning to understand that a lot of the developments that were created in the 50s, 60s, and 70s that isolated and segregated low-income populations and affordable housing are very unhealthy. So a new approach was begun to be considered by the Housing Authority of Portland. Come forward many years, and in about 2002, the Housing Authority of Portland applied for Hope 6 grant money. And there were about 430 units here before. It was a relatively low density to residential development. It was all one type of housing. And now we have 850 units. So we've increased the density, and at the same time, the Housing Authority of Portland dedicated itself to doing something really innovative, which was mixing in market rate housing right into the most affordable housing, some of it in the region, which the Housing Authority provides. We wanted it to be really, truly integrated, and for there to be no difference in the design between the rental housing and the for sale market housing. And they sold those lots off to home builders who then sold them to buyers. So we have a mix of income groups living here, which is the new standard that I was talking about before.
You've also been able to make this area sustainable. What is it here you have outside the school to?
Well, this is a device that filters the storm water before it reaches the waterways, and we have many of these on site. This is one of the largest ones right in front of the school, so it is also great for education, and the teachers can use it to talk about the importance of stormwater treatment on site. 98% of the stormwater that falls on this site of New Columbia is treated on site now. And we were also able to build about 80% less stormwater system than would normally be built for a community like this. So it was the benefit to the housing authority and infrastructure cost savings is enormous.
And in the alley here, we have this nice little graded area. What is this for?
Well, this is, I like this design a lot and the way it looks, but it was part of our way of compensating for the fact that in order to meet the city's standards at that time for alleys, we had to build them a little wider than we would have liked, so we have more asphalt in the alleys than we wanted. And to compensate, we were able to get an appeal to build this strip of permeable paving in the middle so that water can soak down. You can see that the alley is slightly sloped toward the center. Water can soak down and be treated before it enters the the groundwater system.
So in the construction and development of New Columbia, you were able to preserve a lot of the trees, correct?
Correct. And many of these trees were planted in 1942. There were about 430 trees on site when we began the planning. And the city's tree preservation ordinance requires 35% of those be preserved. But there are many ways of meeting the ordinance, and a lot of developers meet it by paying into a fund and not preserving the trees on site. But we were dedicated to preserving many of these trees, as many as we could. So we designed the whole development around the trees as much as we could. The roads around the trees, the school is designed around the trees. And in the end, we were able to save almost 50% of the trees, many of them 48 inches in diameter or more. And a lot of residents who moved from here, who were relocated during the construction, moved back. And many of them, I've heard, say that they remember the trees. So everything else is different. The streets are different. The houses are different. Things are in a different location, but they have some orientation to that site that they knew before because the trees are there.
And when you did the deconstruction of the old Columbia Villa, what happened to all those materials?
Yeah, an amazing amount of the material here was reused. 100% of the concrete rubble was actually ground up and used for the roadbed surface. So that means that all of that was not trucked away from the site. It's actually still here. So it saved a lot of energy and fuel costs. And then there were a lot of buildings that were removed by different housing companies. One building, a service building, is now in Vancouver rebuilt. I think it's about 82% of the material was recycled or reused on site, and tons of material was diverted from the landfill, therefore.
So New Columbia is also a multi-use development. How is that so? We saw the school and then we also have the stores. What else does it offer here?
Well, we're walking down a main street. That's what we call this street here, where we organized all of the retail services. And the school is an anchor at one end. This park is an anchor at the other end. There's a senior housing development here. But we wanted to gather up all the social service facilities and the retail and put them together in an area that would be kind of the center of the development. It allows people to meet a lot of their basic daily needs: workforce training, produce shopping, catch the bus to their jobs here, right on this main street, so that as many trips as they can make in a day they can do on foot or on bike. And then there's a location-efficient design aspect to this too, which is trying to connect developments like this to jobs in the region. And one way we've been able to do that is by building this around the transit. This is a city park. It's not just a private development park here. It's not just for these residents. When we looked at the whole community plan, when we did the neighborhood study, this was identified, this whole northeast corner of town has been identified as a park deficient area. So we worked with the Parks Department to locate a public park here.
It's been real good. We've been getting to know families in the neighborhood, and that's what we hoped. We're really knowing the people around us is important.
It's been cool. There's a lot of kids for the kids to play with. Just a lot of people in general. Just around is different, like it's more of a community as to where we used to live at. There wasn't so much of a community.
So with all this density, you were still able to preserve amazing trees like this one and create these spaces. How is that sustainable, you know? Does that really bring the community together? And
I think it proves that even if you have a dense neighborhood like this, you can still create these natural areas within it that are very civilized and provide a place. Some of these common greens like this one are actually used for playground equipment and kids to play. This is a more passive common green, and creating these gave us an excuse to create a sense of community around them of different types of character. So there's some, as I mentioned, that are play areas and very active and noisy with all the houses looking out onto the play area. And then this one, it's just more passive and contemplative with this beautiful sycamore tree at the center as a focus. These gave us an excuse to save some of these trees.
And it's nice how the houses are kind of pushed back off the street, you know, because it gives the people living there this whole open yard area for, like you said, kids to play. It's very nice. So walking through the neighborhood, it's all very walkable. You have pathways going everywhere, really. This helps out in the commute, really.
Yes, it allows people to walk from the farthest corners of the neighborhood to the school or to a shop on the main street, and the whole community is designed around that. People use the alleys, the paths through the park, the sidewalks, all for walking.
And especially going to school even, you know, because the kids, it's really a security and safety issue with them because they're able to walk to school.
Right. Rosa Parks Elementary School is a Safe Routes to Schools school, so making that walk safe was a big priority in the planning of this neighborhood. The site of some of the greatest density in the entire neighborhood is on the perimeter of the park here, and I want people to see that density can be beautiful. This is very well designed density, really integrated into the neighborhood.
And that density really integrates with sustainability of this place, and that's just really amazing what you've done here with New Columbia, because you've really done it throughout the whole development. And that's really great, something you don't see in our communities today. So thank you very much, Marcy, for being with us. I really appreciate what you're doing here.
Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. And I'm Katie Wood with Sustainable Today.
Well, I'm really glad that the developer was able to save so many of those grand trees, as well as save so much of that material from going to the landfill and actually reusing it in the actual reconstruction of the whole neighborhood. It's such a vibrant community. I don't know if you've been there, but it's a pretty cool area. So transition towns, though, takes a very different perspective. You aren't raising buildings and rebuilding.
Right.
So it sounds like what you're mainly doing is using the interests and talents of the people in the neighborhood itself, and then having them imagine their future in the post-peak oil world, and they go from there. So tell me a little bit about what it takes, David, to actually get a neighborhood underway and working.
I would say the first thing is the curiosity and the want of the people. That, if anything, is the real wellspring which gets it going. I found that once you have people who are really inspired by the movement, then a lot of things happen very quickly. So, but what we're finding is happening here in Portland is that we come together for a sort of educational period originally. Rob wrote a book, The Transition Handbook, and that has been one method we've used. Just to give an idea of how the movement is actually spreading at the moment, he's put the whole text for this book online, and the worldwide community who've got involved in the transition movement are contributing to its to rewriting it. He will maintain editorial rights, but it will be rewritten on a collaborative process based upon shared experience worldwide on transition springing up in different communities. It grew up in Britain. Totnes is a town of 10 to 12,000. Here we are in Portland with 500,000 to 1 million, depending where you want to draw the boundaries. The challenges are very different climates, different cultures, all very different. And so,
and you might add, this is going on now. Not only are there 50 or 70 or whatever towns
I saw
in England.
138 on the website.
Well, yes, and they're in Hungary and Germany and Italy and Japan and Australia, New Zealand, in the United States, and probably Canada, and by now, who knows, Bolivia. I don't know.
Well, so not only is it a really collaborative effort within the community itself that's taking on this transition movement, but also the whole movement is very collaborative in terms of developing and redeveloping these tools and the learnings that you're getting.
Very much so. It's interesting coming from Britain, where UK would sit inside Oregon, and here we are in this vast continent. And at the moment, they're in this process of trying to work out how a supporting network can even function within this country, because the challenges are just so very, very different. But I think it is something which, providing the transition movement keeps its flexibility, it doesn't say this is what it is. It's this loose set of tools. You take it into your community, and then you mould it and work with it, and keep an openness to explore how that might work.
Well, let's talk a little bit about how it's working here in Portland, Jim. So it looks like you have several neighborhood initiatives already underway. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, right now they're just getting started. What we did was first go through, there's a process of several steps. That's what really they furnish us, is this framework. And the first one is to form the steering committee or core group. The second one is to begin doing education. You can show films, you can have discussion groups about the handbook, you can give lectures, whatever, but we've been doing that on a citywide scale for several months now. Now we're ready to go into neighborhoods like New Columbia and begin to do that in the neighborhood. I've already talked to a pastor in that part of town who's on the board of New Columbia, and we're working to see if we can start an educational process. He said that's the biggest thing needed in his neighborhood. I said, that's exactly what we do.
Perfect fit.
This will happen in Sunnyside. This is happening in Lentz and in Woodlawn.
Well, Woodlawn is where you had your chartering event to really kick this off. It was an exciting evening. I was there.
But and they're just beginning to get started in this kind of a so far. Then what happened in Totnes, and typically what happened in both neighborhood and the city level, is a coming together of all the people affected by this educational process who are interested and excited for a larger meeting. In Totnes, they called it the Great Unleashing, which might not be a fitting in Portland, but who knows?
But you're unleashing the interests and the talents and the energy of neighborhood folks who really want to be thinking ahead when climate change is really here, like a big lion in May, right? And when peak oil and transportation options have really started to affect us. So they're taking it on.
And people come attracted by this because it's something positive you can do. And the environmental news that comes in is not always good.
Right.
So this is a place where unleashing may really be the appropriate word.
Absolutely.
So people then come together and listen to a series of lectures or whatever, and then gather on the following day in a large meeting and break up into small groups. It's in a format called open spaces, which you're probably familiar with. And come up with their own issues of importance.
Such as, give a couple
Food,
examples.
energy, what else?
Economics, education, gardens, well-being, heart and soul, looking at how we cope with these challenges, transport, transition tales. This is, I think, a very interesting part, again, of transition. It's the idea of it is you end up producing a plan, an energy descent action plan, which is that plan of how you're going to move to the future. And part of it is people telling tales, bringing in arts and exploring what your future might look like, so that it becomes something inspiring. It's not just a dry document of what you're going to do. It's telling stories. We've all got stories by which we live our lives, and it's about telling stories about how we envision our future to be. And I think this is one really important thing about transition. It looks to be fun. It recognises these challenges, and if anything, it looks them squarely in the face and saying, look, we've got to meet you. We don't know whether we will, but we're willing to give it a go. But one thing we also want to do while we're facing these challenges is have some fun around it. And I think that evening that you were talking about on Monday sort of shows that it's about having fun as well.
It sure did. It was fun, passionate, enthusiastic, had artists, great food, and fabulous conversation too.
Right.
So
that's the essence of community, is face-to-face meetings.
Right.
That determines the size of the relevant group that can organize this thing, whether it's a
So that's why you're moving neighborhood by neighborhood as opposed to the whole of Portland. Because, Totnes was just 10,000 folks, but Portland is just too big.
1 million. Because you can't draw the line and put Tigard outside or Gresham outside or even Vancouver outside. We're all one community linked together. So we have to discover how to do that and still have face-to-face groups that are doing the core program. And building a descent energy plan for one distinct group.
You're using the term descent energy. I saw that on the website. Could you just give a 10-second explanation of what that term is?
10 second, okay. It came about through David Holm. The transition movement is based on permaculture. One of the founders, David Holmgren, termed the idea energy descent, looking at the idea of we're coming down the other side of the peak. We're losing our energy. It's an energy descent. And so some people find it problematic because it has this connotation of descent, not doing well, going down. But he says in energy's descent, you create your future. You are creative in the design of your future. And that's what it's really about. Recognizing there's a descent, but being creative about how you design that future.
Okay, great.
And we don't know how the descent will look. I want to just add a little bit.
Sure.
When we were in the peak oil task force discussions, for example, the question came up, will the descent simply look like rising gasoline prices like we had last year, which will, as we know, it goes up and down and just keeps going down less and up further over the next 20 years or so? Or will it take the form of rationing? I mean, how do you keep police and fire and ambulances moving through the streets if you don't ration the fuel?
Right. Well, the whole question of what that energy descent will look like, we don't know. But what I'm really excited about is here's a framework for a community to get together and figure out what they want to do about it.
Exactly.
Very much so.
That's exciting.
Yes.
Now, I want to take a moment here because we have one more community spotlight that I want to move to, and then we'll come back and catch up with you. So this next spotlight is of a city activist group. It's called City Repair. They organize volunteer groups to transfer communities, but it's one project at a time. City Repair began with the idea that the foundation of sustainability requires a renewed sense of community, culture, and economy, and most importantly, and you've kind of mentioned this, decision-making at a very local level. Now, this is spearheaded by founder Mark Lakeman in 1996. And what he did with his initial band of volunteers is to transform one intersection, one residential intersection, into a village center. And this group story is just very inspirational. And now they lead projects all over the United States as well as Canada. So please take a look.
Today we are at the Rebuilding Center talking to Mark Lakeman, co-founder of City Repair. How are you doing today?
I'm doing just great, Katie. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. So you're a co-founder of City Repair. What is City Repair? How did you come about finding that company?
Well, City Repair is a group of people. You might call us a community. You might call us a group of activists, but really we're just people that live in Portland. And we've decided that if there are things that are going on in our city that we want to change or that we want to improve, that we'd like to practice a little democracy in order to make the world, our world, this city where we live, a better place. The idea of repairing a city or making a place, you know, a better environment within which to live, if anyone's going to do that, it's got to be us, doing it for ourselves.
Why is the Rebuilding Center so special?
Well, the Rebuilding Center is made by the community. And I think it gets down to a really fundamental question. who builds community? It's got to be the community. So one reason why the Rebuilding Center is so special is because people in the community decided that there were things that could be happening in the city that weren't happening, and they wanted to undertake a new direction.
Let's talk about where we're sitting right now. This is just not plaster, right? It's all very special. What exactly is it?
Well, this project is like a lot of things that City Repair is involved in the sense that it's as ecological and sustainable as humanly possible in every single dimension that you can possibly consider. So the material of this space that we're sitting in is literally earth. It's from right here. It's the clay under our feet. So you don't have to pollute in order to go get material to bring it to the site to build with. You simply excavate and build with what's here. And it turns out that it's also non-toxic. So the impact of working with this material is not only that it has a very low environmental footprint upon the earth, it also doesn't poison us or hurt us. And it's also so low tech that children were actually here building this space. For instance, the texture on these columns that look like trees behind me, they're made with spoon marks, spoons from the pizza parlor across the street, but in many more ways than that. For instance, it was the community that decided how this would look, how it would work. Like, from an urban design point of view, it was the community that said, we need a gathering space off of the flow of movement, off of the flow of traffic. So they said, we value sustainability, we value democracy, we value an economy of sharing, of ideas and materials and time and space. And so this embodies the sustainable culture that we all keep talking about, and yet we don't know what it looks like. I think this is what it looks like. It looks like creative participation. It looks like people having fun. It looks like people making new friends as they create places. Sustainable culture, for City Repair's sake, is where we take back our lives, our time, our space, and we re-express in the material around us the inherent human values that we share just by being people. So that, really repairing the city means re-engaging and creating places like this that don't just reflect us, but that actually facilitate us coming together. The building itself is made out of all recycled materials. It's lit by the light that comes down from the sky, doesn't require electrical lighting. So it's really fabulous in the way that it reflects the values of the people that live and work here. It just simply reflects their priorities, which, they prioritize community, they prioritize tomorrow, they prioritize their kids. That's sustainability.
This is just one prime example, but also you have Share It Square, which is another example of what you've done. Let's talk about Share It Square a little bit. What exactly was that project all about?
Well, Share It Square is about 10 years old, and it began in about 1996. It was the second project that we did, and we've now done something over 100 of them throughout the whole city. But it was the second one, and it was the first time that a neighborhood looked at the whole fabric of the community and realized that it did not reflect participation. One of the really interesting comments that came up in those early discussions, somebody said, what do we mean when we talk about the good old days? Because people not knowing each other, or people, streets being dominated by automobile traffic, those aren't the good, that doesn't characterize my sense of the good old days. What were they? We started to talk about villages. Like, there was a time when we all lived in villages. How long ago was that? What was life like at that point? And in that conversation, we learned that it's in the intersection of the village where you find the public square. It's not off to the side. It's right there where our lives flow together and intersect, literally. And just by intersecting, we say, hello, what's your name? We start to tell stories, and community builds itself. So we said, okay, zoning laws that we never had a say in make us leave where we live to go work among people we don't tend to get to know. We come back at the end of the day to come live among people we don't tend to get to know. And that's not how human culture was built. We lived and we worked together. Sherritt Square came from people realizing all that stuff together as a place-based community and saying, whatever, like, we're done with that. And they got upset, but rather than just getting mad, they got creative and they said, we're going to take that intersection right there in the middle of where we all live and we're going to turn it into a place that brings people together. We're going to paint the street with vibrant colors. We're going to locate all these interactive features on all the corners and turn it into a little village heart. All the little pieces will be kind of like starting a garden with seeds or sprouts, and the things will grow over time as we feed them, you know, energy and attention.
What else do you have going on right now? What other projects are you guys working on?
Well, the biggest thing that we do every year happens at the end of May. It's called the Village Building Convergence. Kind of like Sherritt Square began alone to do this thing that they were imagining and designing and funding together. Now there's 30 communities doing it all at once.
So let's say that I want to get my community involved and I want to go talk to my neighbors. How would I go about starting that and getting everyone rallied together? How does that work?
Okay, if you want to change the world, you can certainly do it by yourself as a small community, or you can call and ask for help. And so you could call City Repair. Call us at 503-235-8946 and just say, hey, I have an idea, who can I talk to? And definitely there will be people. And our job is to listen, figure out what it is you want to do, and then find the support, find the energy and the resources to really help you to do things for yourself. You can go to cityrepair.org on the internet. Let's see, you could email hindi@cityrepair.org as well, and just say, hey, this is what we have going on. What do you think? What would you suggest? So we really are a crossroads, in a way, of trying to bring people with ideas together with people that have resources and want to support these initiatives. So that's one thing you can do is to contact us. Let's see. The last thing I would like to say is I'd like to just point out that the idea of repairing the city is not just an external thing. Everyone could use more friends. Everyone could use a little self-improvement. So I think besides that, I'd just like to say that everyone is certainly invited to come and create with us. There will be people coming from across the country and even the oceans to share in this experience. And the people who are going to be speaking will be some of the most inspiring and creative people on the planet Earth. And we can all use a little bit of their inspiration and take it away with us back to our neighborhoods.
Well, it sounds great. I'm looking forward to it. I'll be there. But thank you so much for your time, Mark. Really appreciate it. It's great what you're doing. I'm really excited about it. And I'm Katie Wood with Sustainable Today, bringing you the tools today to make you more sustainable.
Thanks, Katie, for that really good report. Hey, now, if anybody wants more information on this year's 10-day Village Building Convergence project, please go to cityrepair.org for details. Now, if anyone wants to know a little bit more about what's happening in their own neighborhood around Transitions PDX, who do they go to, Jim?
Well, at first they can come in on the web, and the international website is transitiontowns.org, and that's run out of Totnes, but it includes contributions and blogs from around the world. The local website is Transition PDX. Right now it'll take you to another website, but it has the whole transition news from Portland on it, and it's a good place to begin.
Okay, great. Well, I just wanted to say, as Mark Lakeman just said on the video, everyone could use some more friends. And so I'd like to thank you, Jim, a good friend of mine, and to my new friend David for joining us today and showing us that there's yet another framework, another approach for us to move towards more sustainable communities, especially in the wake of peak oil. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, I live in just a regular old house in a regular old neighborhood. It was built in 1980. But there are a lot of things that I can do and am doing on my own journey towards more sustainable living, even though I'm not part of a sustainable community project. So you can do these things too. Here's Go Green with Jean. I don't mind telling you that I'm a bit of an introvert. Yeah, sure, you're thinking. You see me here on Go Green with Jean, and my work requires a lot of extroverted presence. But I like my alone time. However, sustainable living really requires community. 3 things come to mind: learning together, sharing resources, and being of service. Hey, welcome. Come on in. Oh, thanks for the flower. Like the study group that meets at my house. We just finished our 3rd discussion course from the Northwest Earth Institute. These are fabulous. We individually read a section of the booklet each week and then meet at my home to talk about it. We grapple with the issues highlighted in the readings and explore changes we plan to make in our own lives based on what we're learning and sharing with each other.
Oh yeah, it's whatever's in the ground. It moves over, yeah.
Oh yeah, and we eat. This course was on food after all. Usually it's local and organic food, but sometimes the right choice isn't obvious, as we learned from our readings.
This is delicious, Harriet.
It is. Have a need to do that.
I do. I think the tomatoes and the...
There's Harriet. And that's Cookie. They both live in condos up the street. They hosted our first discussion group on global warming. Janelle was in that group too. Here she is at our last grub club, as John liked to call it, leading the tangerine meditation during our final session.
Each time you look at a tangerine, you can see deeply into it. You can see everything in the universe in one tangerine. You can take your time eating a tangerine and be very happy.
You know, when you share learning experiences about something so essential to life as food, well, I got a deeper sense of commitment to sustainable living while getting even more connected with friends who are on the same journey. These discussion courses have helped me examine my unconscious routines, and I've learned about more sustainable choices that I can make every day. No matter where you live, you can create a study group. Oh, that's nice. Just contact the Institute. Now, what about sharing resources? Does everyone need to own and store a 30-foot ladder to use once a year to clean out the gutters? No way. The less stuff, the better. So let's share. These are my neighbors, Jim and Catherine. I store their ladder and other stuff in my garage, and in return, I get to use them. Hey, you guys. Hi, how are you? Yeah, I wanted to, return the hedge clippers. Thanks so much for letting me borrow it.
Sure.
And plus, whenever I need any kind of tool, like a snow shovel or a drill bit, Jim is on hand with it. I sure could use the wheelbarrow today.
Okay.
He has every tool imaginable. He could open a tool library for our neighborhood. The Northeast Portland Tool Library has about 240 members with over 600 tools they share. They're also starting a seed library for the community. The North Portland Tool Library, with over 1,500 members, loans their 500-plus tools out of the historic Kenton Firehouse, a neighborhood landmark. Now back to my own neighborhood. Jim keeps his motorcycle and lawnmower in my garage. The mower is electric, so I keep it powered up, and in return, Jim helps me take care of my lawn.
Hey, Jean, we need to talk about this moss that's in your yard.
Oh, good idea, Jim. Thanks. Yeah, I'll be right up. Hey, we're just talking about this, so I was just wondering, what are you planting this year?
I've got oregano and also but I don't have any basil, but I do have several kinds of sage,
Yeah.
marjoram, and that's for the herbs.
Well, I was thinking about putting a bunch of lettuce in here.
Okay, well, I've got some kinds of lettuce too. Maybe we could figure out kind of a salad mix, because
Okay.
we usually end up with, you know, extra lettuce left over at different kinds of the seasons.
Right. Well, so why don't you two come over for dinner tonight?
Okay, and then we can figure out what we want to plant so we're not planting the same thing.
Perfect, sounds great. I borrow more from them than vice versa, but I make a mean martini when they come over. I think it's a fair trade. Well, the last thing to talk about is being of service without expecting anything in return. I'm an absolute nut about minimizing waste. I gave a talk at my church on how I got down to 1 small bag a month. This is the church's kitchen. I created a trash management system in here.
All right, let's see.
Here I am collecting the plastics that can't be put into curbside pickup, but they can be recycled at the Master Recycler's plastic roundup, so I store them at my house until the next roundup occurs. We noticed that some recyclable items were still showing up in the trash, so I needed to put a sign on the cabinet door to help remind people to keep recyclables out of the garbage can. That's my friend Karen, the assistant to the minister.
Oh, that looks great.
Good. Here. She's a zealot about living simply.
Did I tell you that this is the garbage from 100 people that we had here?
God, that's fantastic.
I know. Isn't that cool?
Yeah. Hey, I got one more sign to fix outside.
Okay. I'll see you out there.
Okay. When you share your knowledge and skills while also following your passion for sustainability, great things happen in your community and in the world.
Hey, Jean. Did you see our new garbage can?
Oh,
We're
yeah.
using the smallest one because we're recycling so much. We don't need that large one anymore.
That's great, Karen.
I know.
Feels good, doesn't it? I'm Jean Bauman, bringing you the tools to be sustainable today. I'm an everyday gal, making my everyday choices count, and you can too. Time to plant the lettuce. Well, that's it for our show this time around. I hope you've enjoyed being sustainable today with me. Now, whether this is the first show that you've ever seen or you're a regular viewer, we would really appreciate your feedback. Please go to our website, sustainabletoday.org, and select the TV program button, where you'll find a link by hitting link here to take survey. We really appreciate your feedback so that we can bring you the shows that you want to see in the future. Plus, look there for other events and projects being sponsored by the Center for a Sustainable Today. So until next time, make every choice count at home and at work as you become more sustainable today. Thanks again, you guys.
Thanks,
Jim.
There's a big, beautiful planet in the sky. It's my home. It's where I live. You and many others live here too. The earth is our home. It's where we live. We can feel the power of the noonday sun, a blazing ball of fire up above, shining light and warmth enough for everyone, a gift to every nation from a star. There's a big, beautiful planet in the sky. It's my home, it's where I live. You and many others